We build relationships with customers, and then we get them really engaged and excited about the company.
Welcome to Not Another CEO podcast. I'm your host, David Politis. Every week, we talk to inspiring leaders and get the true stories, the ups and downs, the lessons learned, and come away with actionable advice for our own journeys. Today's guest is a true pioneer in the world of cloud computing and enterprise technology. He's a multi-time founder and CEO who has built and scaled companies that have transformed how businesses leverage technology. She co-founded and was CEO of CloudSwitch, a groundbreaking tech company that enabled enterprises to securely move applications into the public cloud. That company was ultimately acquired by Verizon. After that, she co-founded and was CEO of Clear Sky Data, an innovative hybrid cloud storage startup that raised over $60 million in funding and was later acquired by Amazon Web Services. Most recently, she was the founder and former CEO of Causely. Today, she serves as an operating partner at an early-stage venture fund called Glasswing Ventures, where she helps support the next generation of entrepreneurs. She's also a passionate advocate for the Boston technology community and for advancing opportunities for women in technology. Please welcome Ellen Rubin.
Hi there. So great to talk to you. Thanks for having me.
I'm excited. I'm excited that we're doing this. We've been trying to get this on the calendar for a while, so very excited for this conversation. Let's go straight into it. First question, what is the one thing you've done, big or small, at any of your companies that's had the biggest impact, and you do again if you're CEO of another company in the future?
So I was thinking a lot about it since we talked, and I was thinking about what really makes a startup get off the ground and be unique and powerful, even though it's so small and there are so many things you don't know and so many challenges. And of course, in my head, it's the team. It's the founding team and it's the early team, and it makes a huge difference in terms of who those people are. And I was thinking about the fact that the people who have been involved with the companies that I have started and I've been fortunate enough to get to work with have certainly an intellectual curiosity. That's part of it. But also they come to a startup, like CloudSwitch or Clear Sky, because they see an opportunity not only to do something that's huge and might have a huge outcome and all of that. Of course, that's part of it. But a lot of them have said to me over time, I came here because I thought this was an opportunity for me to see how startups get built and what it takes to get a company off the ground and to grow and scale it. And that if I were staying in my very highly paid, very wonderful job that I already am in and, have no reason to have to leave, I would never really learn. I'd never have an opportunity to see these things. And so a lot of the work that I did in past companies and would definitely do again is trying to expose people who are there to do a particular job, right? They're developers, they're marketing, sales, they're, finance, whatever it is, they're doing the role that they're in. But to try to really give them a full picture as much as possible about what it takes to build a company, get it off the ground, and what the different areas of the company need to do to be successful together. And so, for example, if you're somebody who is, a BDR on the phone, or you're somebody who is, developing the, initial, product and code, you might not have a really good understanding, and especially if you're earlier in your career, you might not really have a good understanding of what does it mean to raise funding? What does it mean to have to evangelize and be out there in the world, telling the world about this crazy idea that you have? If you're not somebody who is technical, why is the product getting built the way it is getting built, right? Like, why does it matter that the engineers are over there screaming about, this philosophical debate or whatever? There's a reason. And of course, the other way, what does it mean to actually get an enterprise customer to want to buy something from you, and what are the steps of that process? So in order to do that, there are a lot of things that you can do as the CEO, and there are things that you can sort of enlist other people in the company to help you do to create that opportunity and that exposure. So, obviously the all hands and, like regular conversations that you're having as a company. But even more informally, there are a lot of times where having people kind of sit at a more of a lunch and learn, like, let's just have lunch, or let's, get on Zoom during COVID or whatever. And somebody would present not just demoing like the latest version of the product, which is something we did, as part of our sprint process, but also sort of saying like, hey, we're running this marketing campaign and here's why we're doing it. And here's what we're testing. And here are some of the tools that we're using. And here are some of the early results that we're going to keep refining. Right. Or, right now we're raising funding. And so here's some things, you can't share everything, but here are things about the way that process works. And here's the different stages of a startup that go from this point to this next milestone to this next milestone. So definitely did that. And I think I mentioned to you in our previous call that, I even had sometimes one of our board members or someone who was an advisor to the company come in and meet with people and just have a conversation, share their experience and, like the fact that they had built and funded and, themselves been entrepreneurs and stuff like that. And I think for people, it's very encouraging and eye-opening to sort of say like, oh, if I were going to do something like this, I either want to be a founder or I want to, at my next stage, I want to be in a more senior role in, in building a new company. What would it take and what do I need to understand and be part of? And I feel excited about it mostly because, sort of wanting to foster that community in the ecosystem, it sort of helps people then go on to wherever they end up several years later, to kind of take that with them.
Do you, I love this. How do you identify the people to bring on that are going to appreciate that? Like, because I love it. And I actually think back to days where like, probably, I think one of my highest rated all hands that we ever did was when I explained going from seed to A to B and like what it meant. I think I was like, not company related, not like just explaining fundraising was like one of the best rated all hands we ever did. But there are some people who were on that all hands, I remember, who said, I don't care. Like
why are we talking about?
Why are we talking about this? So like, how do you find the people who would appreciate, who want that?
Right. And it's not a like, oh, if you're not interested in all of the different topics, like, oh, that's bad. Right. For some people, they're here to do the thing they love to do. They're passionate about it and they're excited. Sometimes I think it's a little bit maybe more that for people who are, so I guess to answer your question, the people who are like that, you just know them right away. And they raise their hands and they tell you these things, right? Like even in the interviews, I remember people saying, I'm coming here to sit with you and your co-founder and learn and be part of this conversation. And, this is something that I'm excited. And someday I want to do X. So then there's no mystery in that case. In other situations, it's kind of a surprise, like you have someone who's off, like might be a little quiet or maybe a little more introverted. And somewhere along the way, they come over and they kind of engage you in a conversation, mostly when you're sitting casually somewhere, like you're at a company, get together, you're like in the kitchen or, whatever. And they're just, or, you're sitting on Zoom waiting for a meeting to start and they just start asking a bunch of questions, right? Like the questions could be, and they're not about like the topic at hand. They're more like, oh, hey, I saw you talked about this on this podcast, and I was really wondering why you said X. Right. And so then, then that they're there. And I think that even for people who aren't necessarily thinking of that as being, critical or that they don't really want to know about the stages of funding or something like that, it's really great for alignment because whatever you do and however small the team, still there's a little bit of like, okay, I don't get what that guy over there does. Like, if someone's a more experienced person in the startup world, then maybe they have more context. But even so, actually, I have not necessarily found that to be the case where they're kind of like, oh, so-and-so is working on this. I don't really know why they're doing that. You're like, okay, well, let's talk about it. There's a reason. And by the way, what you're building over here or what you're selling over here is directly related. So, we don't have time in a startup for people to be working on random things that don't connect to each other. So let's just make sure you really, really, or even maybe, hey, it's on me as the CEO to make sure that the communication is in place, for people who have questions to feel comfortable to ask those questions. Like, why are we building this and not this? Is a totally fair and legitimate thing for people to want to know.
I like that. When I think back to some of the companies that, like the lunch and learns, when you mentioned the lunch and learns, and I think about some of when we had people speak about their function, like a support person. I remember we had a support person come up and just explain, what kind of tickets do we get? How do we respond? And there were a lot of people being like, whoa, and I remember distinctly an engineer who said, oh, I can fix that problem.
Exactly. They go away and they're like, that's ridiculous. Let's just make that problem right.
Yeah. So I like that a lot. So I mean, I think a theme in my introduction in every conversation we've had so far is like you definitely have a passion for helping the next generation of founders, of entrepreneurs, clearly, because just even in this answer, and one of the things you've mentioned a number of times to me is really helping women in technology specifically. Can you talk about what that means to you? Because you mentioned it a couple times, and I'm curious, how do you do that?
Right. So it's I'll describe it as a lifelong journey, and occasionally, as I'm doing, I'll describe it as yet another panel, about like women in tech and women founders and stuff like that. I kind of feel good about some of the progress that I've seen, and also sometimes I feel like I'm still having the same conversations I was having, 20 years ago. So it's mixed, is how I would describe it. So I because I chose to be involved in IT infrastructure, enterprise IT B2B infrastructure, like storage, networking, data warehouse, like data centers with like blinky lights, like that's my thing. I dig it. I'm really into it. So because I chose that, for my sins, I do actually find myself often being the only woman in the room, and I'm in an area where there are fewer women who have been founders. Not there. It's not none, but it's a smaller number. So I like it or not, it became obvious to me that there was sort of a lack and a need, to be personally involved in that as an issue. And so over the course of many, many years, I'm going to say decades at this point, um, I've tried to do things kind of in a few layers. So like there's sort of like the macro sort of higher umbrella layer where you speak at events and you kind of are out on the circuit and you're constantly, sort of evangelizing and talking, and you're sort of saying, look, here's my journey. I was able to do it. I'm with a bunch of these other women who also did it. And so first of all, it's possible. And second of all, we're here, to be a network and support, a group for people. But then there's a little bit more of like the local stuff in Boston, which, I think, we'll talk a little bit more about Boston, where you can kind of be a little more proactive, right? And then finally, there's like at the most intimate and personal level where it's people in my own network, people in my friends, now kids of friends, who are thinking and starting and stuff like that. So I have two daughters, and I always have said to them that like I kind of have a formal policy in my head, which is if a woman entrepreneur or a woman who is building a career in tech reaches out to me and, anywhere on LinkedIn, a show, calls me up, whatever, I'll take the call and I'll get together with the person if I can and just sit down and talk with them and try to figure out like, what are they wanting to do and what is it that they need? And sometimes what they need is just encouragement. But other times they need really practical stuff. They need an introduction to that guy, Joe Schmo over there, who is going to help them to get to the next point in their funding journey or in their, they need a co-founder or something like that. And then other times they are stuck on issues of team building, right? In terms of like who should be in my founding team, who should be in my early team, what do I need now, what are the skills I need? And sometimes that's introductions that I can make, and sometimes it's more just helping them think through it. So I've done a lot of mentoring, advising, kind of both informally and formally, but you kind of have to think of it as layers of energy that you need to put in, and it has to be sustained, right? It can't just be like, oh, I feel like doing it this month and then I'm busy.
The part, you said something about showing people that it's possible. And in a number of these interviews that I've done now, I'd say at least 30-40% of them, the CEO I'm interviewing has said something to the effect of, this person, and they could name the person, showed me that it's possible, and whether it was a family member, a parent, or mentor, or just someone they watched, saw at a conference. Hey, super, when you say it, it actually, I think there's some element that literally just knowing it's possible changes something in your like brain. Like, I could go do that. Why can't I go do that?
100%. And sometimes it's like, I want to do it, but I'm not ready to do it yet. And I'm trying to think about the steps I want to take in my career that will get me to a point where either I will become the founder and the CEO, or maybe that's not the aspiration. Maybe the aspiration is I want to be part of the founding team and I want to run this type of, functional area. And therefore I need to build skills. either or, right? I think, I think it's important to pursue all directions there. But, of course, in my heart of hearts, what I'm really like is like, why wouldn't you want to be the founder CEO? It's like, well, this is the whole world, right? So I'm a little like, you can do it, don't limit. If that's what you think you want to do, don't be limited.
Um, what were the challenges that you faced? I mean, you like you said, I mean, you've been in like the hardcore infrastructure world, which is definitely, I mean, it's not consumer technology, it is not a dating app, this is not like this is like hardcore,
Yes.
infrastructure. What were the challenges that you faced as you were starting your first companies?
So it's funny. I always think about it and I think like, was being a woman a limitation for me? And I'm sure on some level it was. I have no doubt that it was. But actually, at the time, the way it felt to me was that I wasn't an engineer. I wasn't a technical person. And in fact, that seemed to be the bigger hurdle. So my background and expertise was more in, so I have an MBA and my background and expertise was more on marketing and, business development, third party technology relationships and stuff. And I had built an early career on that role. And that's actually kind of a hard jump, right? To go from there into, and then I'm gonna build a company that's a heavily technical company, and I'm gonna be the founder, CEO, and stuff like that. So part of the journey for me was, realizing that I needed a technical co-founder who I could really work well with and who was comfortable with me being the CEO. So that was, part of the journey. And then part of the journey was just all I can say is just like working my butt off to get smarter about the technologies that I was involved with and hands-on with the products and like really sitting with the people, with my co-founder and other people who were the early engineers to really understand what are we talking about here. And in the end, I am who I am, right? I'm the business, I'm not the technology, but you have to get closer and closer and closer so that you really have something to say about it or have intuition about like where is the market going and what opportunities are there. So that to me at the time, that seemed really hard. And, I needed in some cases, like, a lot of support. So I didn't feel like I was just kind of making stuff up, like I memorized a whole bunch of stuff and now I could, so like that to me, those were like the really early concerns and challenges that I had. And, some of it is, determination and desire to do it. But some of it is also having really great people around you who will work with you. I used to say, like, to one of the CloudSwitch founding engineers, who like he and I used to hang out together a lot, and I would say to him, I only understand 50% of what you just said to me right now, and he'd go, okay, which 50%? Unravel the whole thing and stuff like that. But at the end of it, I understood more, right? And then that was really helpful for me to like relate that to the business decision that I needed to make.
So another conversation and thing I mentioned in the introduction is you're also very passionate about Boston and you've built your businesses there and you're trying to help that community now. And what is kind of the Boston ecosystem, what's that evolution kind of looked like over the years? I've spent some time there, but obviously I spent most of my time in New York and Atlanta. But Boston, I feel like has kind of its own unique kind of journey, if you will.
Dead. And last time we talked, you were like, I was like, oh, stab in the heart. We're just, like sharing some of the stats that are out there. And I'm like, oh, Boston's number this and number that. And I'm just like, so, okay, so I'll just get it out on the table. Like I'm a huge, Boston fangirl. So like there's no, impartial thinking here at all. But what I would say to you is I built my career here and I have a whole group of people that I am connected to and, involved with on an ongoing basis as, fellow entrepreneurs, founders, investors, angels, people who are in the academic world who kind of move back and forth and stuff like that. It is a vibrant and powerful ecosystem here. And, there's definitely a desire among myself and my peers to keep that going and to keep enabling the health and the growth of that environment. Obviously, we benefit from having fantastic institutions, and certainly in the world of AI, I mean, Harvard, MIT, and a bunch of other institutions here are at the forefront, and there's all sorts of exciting stuff that comes out. The commercialization of it is very much based on people who are young and early founders believing that this is a good place to build a company and that they're going to have access to capital, to advisors, to mentors, people who are powerful in their industry who can help with that, with, introductions and stuff, and ultimately acquirers if that becomes the relevant next step. So there's a lot of thinking that, I do, and, been part of a lot of different organizations, most recently with the post-exit founders that I will talk about in a little bit probably. But like that, the goal is to really make sure that that ecosystem is strong. And I would say that, if you look at it, obviously Boston has had a lot of success with companies like HubSpot and Wayfair and Klaviyo that have gone public. And then also like my early journey at Netezza in the data warehousing space, went public, then, got bought by IBM, product still in the market 20 years later. Kiva Systems that got bought by
Yeah.
Amazon, as is now Amazon Robotics. So like companies that kind of became foundational companies and that are still doing that. And, the goal obviously is to continue that momentum and to also have some of those companies as anchor companies to help pull the next generation into the community and to stay here and to help build it and grow it. And that's what I'm doing right now, honestly, in my work at Glasswing. I would tell you that, like there's something with Boston where it's sort of like the stuff that's the hard technology problems, we're really great at that. Like when sometimes it's been more sort of like application level or, stuff that's more, I don't know, consumer oriented, we've been less successful. And that's just true. So, that's, just, being more reflective on things. But there's enough here and enough critical mass for people to be able to say, I can stay and I can build it. And what I have found is that the community is unbelievably supportive and collaborative. Like you don't come here and get lost, right? It's small, it's, much more intimate. And if you want to be part of things, you can be very quickly.
What's kind of interesting, I just thought about this actually as you've been talking, because I've talked to a number of people about their local communities, and it's kind of interesting because you think, at least high level, COVID happened, everyone kind of works from home, all the companies started going remote, there's no more. But actually, in a lot of ways, the local piece matters
Right.
so much, and I don't think you can actually build community and the support system virtually, let's say. He felt like, I don't know, I just, as you're saying it, it's like, yeah, you need that critical mass, the schools help, and the exited founders and the big companies and the, all those things, kind of even the folklore, the lore of the
Yes.
city and the companies. Like there's something interesting about that because so many people are like, we're all remote and everyone's all over the world and the country. But actually, at least for the founder type communities and like being local, there's something very real about that.
Totally. It's I guess what I would say is I've had a little bit of a shift in terms of I was at Amazon, when COVID started, and I was there working remotely with people who were all over the place. And then I started Causley also as a fully remote company, which I would never have done, prior to COVID. And the answer is you can do it. It's possible. Do I love it personally myself as a founder? I don't love it. And
Mhm.
now that I'm sort of back downtown and spending time, with other entrepreneurs, like, sort of all the time, right? Constantly like, okay, yeah, let's just go grab coffee and stuff like that. I realized how much I missed it and how much it was missing from my experience. And, we're like doing events, all of Boston, Glasswing for sure, but all of Boston, we're doing events all the time. And like hundreds of people are showing up. You know what I mean? Like just on a Tuesday. So clearly there is a desire and an interest in doing it. I think the answer is that people want to do it. They may just not want to do it 5 days a week. And I think that the balance of that was something that I didn't maybe understand as much in terms of that for some people, just having a day or two where they didn't have to come into the office and that they could have some flexibility about it. And that really was possible to do their jobs when they needed to remotely was pretty life-saving. And so I don't think people are rushing to give that up, but you can still do it the rest of the time and that love.
I think that's going to be a competitive advantage for companies. The one that may have recently made that hard decision to say we're going to do this in the office, we're going to build this team locally, we're going to, it's expensive,
Yes.
harder to find talent, maybe depending on what people are looking for. But even the stuff you were talking about before, you can't have that conversation where someone sits next to you and says, hey, I read this, I heard this, because they're not going to ask for the CEO to get on a Zoom to ask them about some of the assessment podcasts. Like that's not going to that's not going to happen. Those conversations don't occur. The conversations between two people on different teams having lunch at the same time, like those things don't ever occur.
It's much harder. Yeah, we were doing a lot of, so I ended up, certainly more recently at Amazon and at Causley, doing many, many more one-on-ones with people because I had lost the connection, right? In terms of you could just wander by, and see them in the hallway or something like that. And I didn't like that. And I wanted to have that type of connectivity. It is harder to do. And for some people, if they're more, introverted or this is their first job, it's a little stressful to them to get on the phone with the CEO. You're kind of like, okay, what do I say? So unless you're sitting at a table and they're listening and they might be more inclined to sort of or question it or something like that. So I definitely think that. Yeah, I think a lot about like the people who are like it's early in their career and they need mentoring and they need models and they need also the social aspect of things. And I would not want to go back to a situation myself personally where there was none of that. And if you're doing things on a quarterly basis and stuff like that, okay, good. You get people in and stuff, but like it's not the same. And so, I'm as I think about it, I do have to say though that like, what the companies that have been really good at doing like fully remote, they got excellent at it, right? They had their practices and their policies and stuff like that. But for me personally, I'm missing part of what makes me want to be a founder.
I agree. When you say that about the people who are earlier in their career, I kind of feel like it's whatever people's opinions are, the set of children that kind of were in school in those really important years during those first couple of years of COVID, and we don't really know what that impact is
That's right.
down the line. And my kids were very young and went through that, and I think there may be some social elements that weren't there because it was an important period of time. I actually think we could make the same argument for the people who came out of school and started working. We don't even know what 10 years from now.
Right.
Those people don't have the networks. They don't. I mean, just by definition, they don't have the networks and those close relationships and everything that they had. They don't have the person that they sat next to and grinded it out for,
Right.
all the long hours. Like, even if you've got a great culture, at least in my opinion, like that's the group. I don't think it's the people who are 20 years into their career
Yeah.
that were impacted. It's like, it's those people who were this is their first job,
I
and that's
agree.
how they experienced work.
Yes, I totally agree, and I realized I forgot to say something earlier, which I should have said, which is one of the other things that I did in some of the earlier companies was also to try to bring customers in to the company physically where possible, which back at that point, I've been in the past, I've been able to do, but certainly on Zoom and to do sessions where a customer who's an excited, happy customer who either, recently purchased or is in the process of, deploying and expanding, exposing the company as a whole to as much of that as possible and allowing them to ask questions and get a feeling of like the importance and the passion of it, right? And so, like it's easier to do those things when you're kind of gathering people together and you're having that kind of more of a group experience. It can be done on Zoom, it's some ways it's easier to do it on Zoom, but like that feeling of we built this product and it's for this guy or this woman, and here's why they bet on us. And they made a decision about using our product that they didn't have to make. And here's why that matters, right? Like there's some of communicating that. Like I think for especially someone earlier in their career, you want them to understand that what they're doing has real impact on people's lives.
I love that. I want to go down that thing is like tactically, because I love that. I actually didn't do it enough at any of the companies I was a part of. And when we did it, again, you could see the impact that it had on the team. Like how
Yes.
often, for example, like was that a regular thing that you would do at once a quarter, once a year, once a month?
As much as we could make it happen, right? You needed the customers to be able to. They sometimes had to get approval from legal. It was like a whole to do, right? Enterprise, right? But wherever possible, and especially if the companies were, a little less regulated, like not the banking customer, right? Not the healthcare customer, although sometimes, but more like, a company that might be a little more able to say, yes, it's okay for you to just go ahead and speak. It's funny, like how strict some of that was, but wherever I could get that to happen, and I had someone who was comfortable as a champion doing it, they loved doing it. It was fun for them, right? It was like an opportunity to talk about like, and also, of course, what did they do? They gave us here are the next 5 roadmap things we really want.
Yeah, of course.
We'll have the engineers in front of them. So, that was
Um,
good.
did you moderate that? Did you like do kind of fireside chat? You moderated? Did someone on your team do it? Did they present? How did you structure that?
Sometimes I did it, but often it was like that the person who had, if it was a salesperson who had actually built the relationship and done the, kind of development of that, I'd have them sort of like do the introduction, like, look here, this is what we're doing here. Like, again, like, this is what we do. We build relationships with customers and then we get them really engaged and excited about the company, right? Like that's
I
so,
like that.
so that was very fun to do. Right. It didn't have to be me all the time. In fact, sometimes better if not, like that other people in the company are doing this kind of stuff.
I like that. Let's talk a little bit about operating rhythm, because we've talked about these all hands and we've talked about some of these things. Like how did you structure that? Was there a let's say how strict was the cadence? What was in that cadence? Can you talk me through that a little bit?
For sure. Yeah. So it's evolved over time, right? So like more recently, everything's on Slack all the time, right? So there's constant, updating and, engagement and stuff in that context. And I would say that the all hands piece of it, especially where you're remote, is even more urgent in terms of stuff that you can do. If you're in an office, which I was, in all my previous companies, there were a lot of things that were, as I was describing, kind of like the more formal stuff, like all hands is sacred. We do the all hands. It's not a casual thing. We want to make sure people know that there's going to be an update and everybody's there.
How often were the all hands?
Every week.
Every week.
Every week, yeah.
For how long?
It sort of depended on what there was to talk about. And so there were times when they went longer and it included more updates and comments. Sometimes they were relatively brief. Obviously, we had the engineering structure, right, in terms of like the stand up and all that kind of stuff. So that was going on. And some of the information was communicated there, but we tried to keep those tight. And we also used the opportunity of, like the sprint review and the opportunity to kind of talk about what we accomplished to tie back sometimes in terms of like not every single time, but like we're on a quarterly basis to say, remember, here's what we're building and here's the value to the customer. And here's why this sprint moved us forward to that, because the customers that we've been working with or the design partners told us that they needed certain types of things. And here's how these things relate. And later on, we're going to do it. So it wasn't like a full roadmap review, but it was sort of like you are here on the map of, kind of connecting the dots a little bit. And then we did, certainly at Clear Sky, we did more of these lunch and learns and stuff like that. I tried to do those, every couple of months where it was just a topic that seemed interesting to people or that I felt that people seemed not to know about and that maybe it would be helpful for them, or somebody asked me a question that I thought maybe was good to share the answer. So those were things that we did regularly. And the way I feel about this stuff is you don't want it to be onerous and people are busy and nobody wants another meeting. But people, even in a relatively small company, and gets much more challenging as you've scaled and you have more like functional areas, like they sort of just want to know what's going on. And if you don't have a regular cadence of it, they will go look for the information or hear things that maybe aren't even the right information, right? Like there's no upside to that. And so what you really want is, even if there's not a huge amount to report, the idea that you've sort of said to them, we're going to be as like insanely transparent as we can possibly be. And you can ask whatever question you want. And we're going to be really open about things. Some things, we're not ready to share information yet because we're still in progress or it involves whatever, somebody's personal issue or whatever. But the truth about it is like where we can, we're going to share the information. And then that's it. And then you know what's going on. Right. And then there's not like a little bit like, oh, I heard or so-and-so is thinking this and stuff like that. And I think that that's important for alignment, but I also think it's important for people to feel like they understand what is happening with the company and what is the mission of the company.
I like the connecting the dots term that you said before. That I think that at the core, right, is such a value where people, if they know what they're working towards and why they're doing the work and why the company's doing, like that just is so much, you get so much leverage on that. And I find that I talk to, especially early stage founders, companies, 25 people or something like that. They feel like for them, it's the burden to do the all hands, and I tell people, you don't know actually the power of that all hands, of the weekly cadence where people know they're going to get the information. Someone told me one time, if you leave a gap in information, people are going to fill it with, you know what, basically, because, you know, they don't know where else to go get that information. So it's like giving them that, you know, so the connecting the dots actually that's the power, because when you get everyone aligned and everyone knows what we're working towards, they work harder usually.
Right. Yeah, there's a lot of, like, mystery, especially around the funding, the VCs, valuations, like, there's a lot of, like, "Ooh," whatever, and so to the extent, without sharing people's personal information, you sort of wanna say, "Look, this is how this works," right? I mean, the truth is, this information is all sitting out on the internet, you can find it pretty straightforward, but sometimes, like, where you sort of explain it to people, it helps relieve some of the, anxiety that people might have. And I did feel it's funny, there were, we can talk about Amazon, probably, over coffee sometime, whatever, but, like, I learned a lot there, and one thing that I learned was how seriously they took the recruiting and the onboarding of new employees. Like, it was really intense. Like, the interview process was super intense, and, there's all this stuff about, the leadership principles and applying them and everything and showing how you did stuff, but what it did was it kind of, like, leveled the bar for what are we screening for this particular role at this level, and what kind of things do we want the person to know how to do and be able to do and to be able to culturally fit into this organization, and it was at least a model. Like, I don't know that all of it is applicable in a startup, but it demystified things that could be for people confusing, right? Like, "Okay, we hired that guy. Why'd we hire that guy? What are they doing?" All that kind of stuff. "Is he gonna make more than me?" Well, you kind of if you, like, remove a lot of that, it kind of allows people to focus on that they came to do exciting work. And that's why they're at this company.
Mm. How long were you at Amazon?
About a year and a half.
What else? I'm curious. What are like the other top thing? You won't talk about the bad stuff, the good stuff. Like what are the top things you took away other than that?
I still believe in the PRFAQ process, which you may know of. So the idea that when you're developing a new product, before you write a line of code, you write a document that is the press release that will be released at the time that you launch the new feature or service, and the FAQs of the, like, dozen questions, there's like a half a dozen that are in all of them, and then, there's some variation for the rest of them, but, like, the key questions are, who's it for? Why do they need it? What are they doing today? And what can't they do? And why is this going to uniquely solve their problem? Right? Like the working backwards stuff, but, like, forcing you in a systematic way to go through that. And I think it's good for startups to do that too. Like, what do we imagine this product and this company to be? Do the founders agree on what that would be? Right? Like, these are really important things. And I think that being forced to write it down as an actual document and not just PowerPoint with bullets, you'd be amazed how much harder that is, right? Like, like, does the argument hold together? And can you explain it to somebody who doesn't know anything about this product? Like, could you write it in such a way that people would understand? And I think it was great training.
Eesh. Um, you you've been through talking about Amazon. You've been through the M&A process a number of times with your companies. Um, how did those processes start? Were those you selling the company, or were those people buying you, if that makes sense?
So I've had it many ways, many flavors, and now at this point, I've also been on the other side of the table, and, so
Yes.
sometimes I'm just like, "Whoa, this is," like, every movie is different is how I would describe it. So, I've kind of, I've seen it in a lot of ways. So, obviously, it is, more fun to get bought than it is to be selling, right? That's, I think, a truism. And, sometimes the decision is, are we at a stage where we need to, right? Because we're gonna need to raise a lot more capital, and is that gonna be, accessible to us and stuff like that? There's some of that. Sometimes it's, wow, there's an opportunity here. What's the expression? There's an expression, local maximum,
Mhm.
where, like, it's not to say that the company couldn't theoretically go on and do other things, but we're sort of at a local maximum where the founders feel like this would be a place that they wanna go and that could be a good outcome. The investors are supportive of it, and it feels like if we're part of this other thing, we could get to where we wanna get to better, faster, in a more impactful way, right? And so there are decisions to be made. And, of course, best is where there's a bidding war and then people are fighting over you and stuff like that. That's always, the desired outcome. But really, in the end, you have to say like, I'm going to go devote my life and a bunch of the people, like this team that I built, and they're going to spend a bunch of time in their lives at this company, right? One way or the other, we're going to be there at least for a year or two, and we're going to need to see how it goes and see if we're going to stick around. And, like, is that what we want to do now? Like, is that the next thing we want to do? And, like the answer, like certainly, in terms of some of the experiences I had, when we were talking about things that, at CloudSwitch, we were like, well, we're pretty early and whatever, and this is a growing market. But we were looking at the fact that hybrid cloud and the adoption of cloud computing by enterprise was clearly going to happen, but it might have taken, and in fact did happen. And, I got to see it all the way through, to like when I was at Amazon, another 10 years. Right? Like, because I was so ridiculously early. I was back in 2008, so it was kind of like, okay, as we get into 2015 and stuff, it becomes just everybody's using the cloud, but it wasn't like that at the beginning. So, like, being part of the Verizon cloud platform made sense and seemed like a good bet for the company to do. And but like as with all of these things, it's like it's your baby and how do you feel about it? And, the emotion comes into it. But in the end, you sort of have to sit down with your co-founders and your investors and say, like, is this the right time for this company? And, I think, I'll stand by those decisions.
Would you meet with those? A lot of people are getting calls from corp dev kind
Mhm.
of all over. Like, would you take those calls? Let's say when you're running the companies and some random person from some, just reaches out cold. Hey, I read about you, Ellen, would love to talk. Like, would you take those meetings or, kind of put those at arm's length?
Usually those happen after you've announced funding, you
Yes,
get those
always.
calls, right? You're kind of like, dude, I just raised funding, right? Like go away, right? No, I think it's always good to have like a quick intro conversation, but early on where you're still building the product and you're still getting it, into customers' hands and you're showing the value it is and stuff like that, there's really no point. And so at that point, I would feel more inclined to say, listen, we're not ready yet, but happy to talk with you, 6 months from now, a year from now. Then when you're sort of at a point where you're kind of more in the scaling and growing phase, it's not a bad thing because some of those companies can be strategic investors, right? I've had strategic investors in pretty much all of the companies I've been part of. And it's they don't necessarily become your acquirers, but on the other hand, it's usually something that is additive to the other fundraising that you're doing and can be valuable. And also, sometimes it also is helpful with customers that they feel that you have, like the relationship with a larger strategic partner and stuff like that. So those things can be helpful and good to do as just a let's get to know each other. Let's engage a little bit. But the truth is, you don't want to spend a lot of time on that stuff before you're ready. And it's an incredible time sink. Like I used to find, oh my God, I used to find with especially CloudSwitch again, as an example, like everybody wanted to talk about the cloud. So they were like delighted for you to come and have a long conversation and they put like 25 people on a call, right? Like, it was ridiculous. It was just ridiculous because they were, like, trying to like, I remember with VMware, like, they couldn't get enough of us, like, about, like, "Oh, what are you building?" And, like, "How much of it can we steal?" And, like, "Oh, something really smart that we don't know." And, you're doing that little, like, dancing with the elephant thing, right? Where you're, like, tiptoeing around trying not to get, rolled, over. So it's not a good use of time. But I think in a, like, sort of surgical a couple of people that you talk to seem like they're smart and they get it, and then it's worth kind of like, "Hey, if you're gonna be in town, let's have coffee," like keeping it light.
It's interesting, a couple things you said there. Dancing with the elephant is a good way. I've never heard that, but that's a good way of describing that. And I think over the years, I don't know how many big companies copied things that I showed them, in the process. And I think now it's the AI companies like you in the early days of cloud. It's the AI startups that are getting calls from all the corp dev. I work with a bunch of them, and they get these calls, and oh, come in, we're really interested, and they show up with 20 people
Right.
and just give me a full, brain
Right.
dump.
"Let's do an hour demo." Right, exactly. You could almost say like, "Look, we're happy to have a conversation, but we'd like to do it in person, in our in downtown Boston, and then just see what happens," right? They're not gonna bring 25 people to Boston. I mean,
Right. That's good advice. That's good advice.
refuse, right? Like, I really want to talk to you and meet with you, but let's just get to know each other, right? Because really what they wanted was the demo and the chance to kind of like suck your brain dry a little
Yeah,
bit.
exactly.
Well, don't give it to them, right?
I like that. What is your view on AI? I mean, you've seen so many of kind of these technology cycles and rise of the internet and rise of this, rise of cloud. What is your view on AI?
So, Rudina, who's the founder and managing partner, along with Rick Grinnell at Glasswing, so they have a saying, okay, which is that AI is the overnight sensation, 70 years in the making. That's their thing, and so I had to laugh when I heard them say that because I remember I started a company. I was living in Tel Aviv after business school, and I started a company with some Israelis, like by accident, like a few of us in a room somewhere. And it happened to be a real time recommendation engine for e commerce, which was at that time kind of a big thing, right? And it was like, if you like this, you might also like this. And it was using Bayesian network algorithms at the time to figure out, like, based on your demographics and your buying patterns and stuff like that, what would you like? And of course, we had no idea what we were doing. It's like a ridiculous story. But we were using the AI technology of that time, which I believe was sort of the second wave out of three waves of AI, where it's kind of like been the hottest thing and then it's kind of disappeared completely. So here we are, right? In this latest phase, this one's going to stick, right? I think we can agree that that's where we are at the moment, where it's like it gained so much traction and buy-in by people. The big thing this time that's different from my cloud computing experience is that enterprises started buying right away. So I'm seeing that, in terms of the
Interesting.
diligence that I do diligence on companies every day, as part of Glasswing, and also in the companies that Glasswing has funded. We're already at seed and even at pre-seed. They're already at you know, hundreds of thousands of dollars of ARR. Sometimes, like there's meaningful revenue that's being generated, and it's very often at enterprise customers. So you have to say, who knows where this is going to go, right? We're in a totally wild and wild west moment. But what really excites me about it is that there is a desire to use the technology for actual problems in an actual industry context that solves a particular use case, like right away. Not necessarily we built this huge platform and somebody's going to figure out what to do with it and stuff like that. So, like the term we use at Glasswing is intelligent verticals, where it's kind of like augmenting of human, labor and processes to do things that couldn't have been done before. SaaS couldn't accomplish it. Just general automation couldn't have been done, but now because of AI, it's possible to do. So, I can take you when we talk more about, my background and stuff, I can tell you more about some of the examples of it. But like the idea that people have started to really apply the technology immediately in a way that has immediate benefit to the user and to the enterprise customer is very exciting to me. And so I feel really good about that. Like as I was kind of mentioning about CloudSwitch, like there was like a long burn with the cloud computing adoption, not because people weren't adopting it. Of course they were. The developers were doing it like, rogue on the side, shadow IT and all that kind of stuff. But until it became a company standard and people felt like they had to use it, it took many years.
Yeah. I mean, do you think that people will have to raise less money because of this? Do you think that people like what because it is I see what you're seeing, which is you build a product now and the speed to build the product and get it out in market is scary. To be clear, it's a little to me, I find it scary because that means what's the moat for that, you
Right.
know?
Right.
And I see a lot of people talking about could we raise, venture is not the right thing, but then you see the companies that are being the most successful are raising still huge amounts of money. So it's like it's very confusing. I don't know,
It is. So I guess I would have to say, like, I'm old school enough that I think that even though it is actually possible. Okay, so let's put a couple of facts down on the table. It is actually possible to build a product and get to revenue with fewer people now, with AI doing a bunch of the work. It just is, right? And there's a set of capabilities that didn't exist previously. On the other hand, and we talked about this, I think, on the previous call, like just because that's true doesn't mean that the companies won't raise a lot of money. We know they are. They're raising a ton of money at in ridiculous valuations, and that's that because the capital is available and wants to be deployed, right? And because this is exciting and, a huge tsunami wave that people wanna, be part of. And I think it's an interesting question about like, okay, well, so, you don't have to spend on infrastructure anymore. We got rid of that because now you use the cloud. Okay, still you spend on infrastructure, you just spend in a different way. Fine. You don't have to hire as many people up front. Okay, fine. But still, you have to take the AI and make it work for you. And so the people that you hire need to have certain types of capabilities and skill sets, and you still need to build a team. So presumably, if you are raising $50 million or some crazy number, right? Which you see people doing at early stages. The argument is that you got to market faster and now you're going to scale faster. And at that point, you're back to some of the same issues that you've been at previously, right? Which is it's fine that the AI is going to do a lot of the pipeline development and the sales productivity and the go to market and the customer success and the trouble ticketing and all the stuff that we were talking about, incident management, all of that stuff is going to happen. But still, you've got to hold it together in terms of what is this business and what is it that you're trying to accomplish. I personally don't think that two guys and a bunch of AIs is the answer to that problem. I still think you end up with teams that perhaps the ramp of the scale is a little slower, but still ends up with, you're still ending up with 100 people. I know people disagree with me on this, but I think you get to a certain point where your engagement and your interaction with the market and with the customers will still require that, and that we're not at a point where you just sort of say to the AIs, "Okay, go figure it out, take it forward, I'll be over here planning strategy," or something like that. So, prove me wrong, but that's kind of my feeling.
I actually agree. I tend to agree with you. I think the challenge is that the stories that are being told and kind of sensationalized, I don't know, on LinkedIn and everywhere else is the three companies that got to, this much revenue with 10 employees. And it's like, but there have been those in SaaS there, it's like, and so I agree with you. I just think it's an interesting moment in time where it's like kind of crazy and people are feeling like, oh, this is the beginning of no employees.
Right, exactly, like, "For sure did it, so of course I can
Yeah,
do it."
yeah,
Like, because I'm also very focused on enterprise, I do believe that the relationship building with the
yes.
enterprise still requires a set of laws of gravity and behavior, and so that you're still gonna wanna do those things and that will still matter, and it's possible that we'll do a better and more efficient job at the way in which we build and sell products and, engage with customers and stuff like that, but still fundamentally, that arc of how you do that is gonna require time, energy, and human relationships, and that's what I think. And I'd be glad to do less, like, managing of spreadsheets and messing around in Salesforce.com myself, right? I mean, that'll be just fine with me.
Um, so talk to us a little bit about Glasswing and your role as an operating partner there. Do you make investments? Do you just work with the existing founders? Do you like what does that role look like?
Yeah, I wanted to do something very specific and, was very happy and fortunate to be able to do it with the Glasswing team. So, it's kind of split between a few different things. So there's definitely working with the portfolio companies and being able to do some of the advising and mentoring and stuff that I have been doing all along and, in a more maybe sort of focused way, with companies that you get to see them over a long period of time. So I love that. And then I'm part of all of the, the regular partner meetings, the diligence calls. I help in terms of making introductions of companies that might be interested in getting funded by Glasswing. And so I'm kind of in the mix of it's almost like a fire hose of technology and company and founders coming at me all day long, and I love it, and I love going downtown and hanging out with the team and meeting people downtown and just being, again, part of that whole ecosystem, so that's very, exciting to me, and, like, kind of, uh, some of it is about the Boston community, but some of it is also in terms of, like, the Glasswing approach to AI and the use of AI for enterprise and cyber and stuff like that, I think is unique. So I think it's an opportunity to go, like, really deep on sort of the core technologies that are out there, but how are they getting applied, such as applying it to these, intelligent verticals and stuff like that, looking at, what makes a company have a protective moat beyond everybody's just buying some AI right now because they feel like they should try stuff, right? And so, like, evolving that and understanding what to look for in that type of a situation is it's very cool and exciting to me. I'm used to being on the other side of the table, right? And so
Yeah,
now I'm
right.
like, interesting, okay. And some of the things are things you would know. It's about the founder and it's about the experience that the founders have had and stuff. But some of it is also like a hardcore look at, is AI being used in a way that could not be done previously with other technology and automation? And is it not just a wrapper around stuff for user experience or to make it look cool or something like that, but it is fundamental to what the problem that is being solved. And so being able to say, okay, well, we've developed something that takes advantage of a lot of the different techniques that are out there, but we've applied it in a very particular way. And some of it is understanding the domain and the background, right? Like the data sources that are available and being able to apply them in a way that's unique based on the founder understanding the specific problem. So that's kind of where we are. So yeah, some of the companies that are focused on inventory management for manufacturing, Verisyn, or Crane is a company that does looking at operational issues for the construction industry, right? So something like that. Or LabViva is for scientific materials and lab equipment. So a lot of these processes for these types of markets, believe it or not, are still highly manual, and a bunch of people with like in and out of different systems and spreadsheets and all this kind of stuff, because there were pieces that could not be automated and there was data that was not available to make the next step in the decision. So it's kind of like an end-to-end workflow that is now being made possible. And I love that.
The domain expertise is definitely to know where to apply AI
Right.
in these workflows, not generic work.
Exactly. Like not any problem, but this particular set of problems.
Yeah, yeah, I see that. The companies that are getting the most, other than like the cursors of the world, like I think the ones I've seen that are getting that revenue quickly are those ones
Yes.
because it's just so it's like, hey, I worked at this industry before.
Yes.
I had to do the spreadsheets. I had to press the buttons. I had to move the stuff around.
Right.
And now literally it's all being done for you. Like those, I think those are the ones that are right now crushing it. Like those are the ones that are, and getting enterprise adoption because the enterprise is like, sure, like that's going to save me literally hundreds of thousands or millions of dollars.
Yeah, one of the Glasswing companies is Black Kite, which is in the cyberspace, and there it's not vertical specific, but it is a very specific problem, which I'm on the board of a public company called Allegiant, which is a manufacturing company, and I understand these things now from the customer side more easily, which is third-party vendors, right? Third party, not you, you're good, but like all your supply chain and your third-party vendors,
Mm.
like how do we keep them up to the bar, right? We wanna make sure that that is where it needs to be and all that kind of stuff. And so like technologies that are able to take this very often like disparate and unstructured data sitting around in all different places, and put it together in ways that allow you to really make the decisions and help understand where threats could be or how to improve an operational process. It's very cool. So I'm really loving that. And I'm enjoying seeing all of the technology and working with the founders. And for me too, it's kind of like, okay, like if we're going to build stuff here, let's build real stuff, right? Like in industries that have real problems that have not benefited maybe even as much as SaaS has benefited in other like companies that were like cloud native companies.
I want to transition a little bit to your background. Um, where did you know, like from a young age, did you know you wanted to be an entrepreneur? Do you know you wanted to be a leader? Did you know that like at a young age?
No, I'm going to describe it as like latent. So no, and my family sometimes laughs. They're like, "Okay, did we know that you were going to go do all these things that you ended up doing? Like, where did we talk about that?" No, so I didn't really know that I wanted to do it. And then when I got to college, and even more so when I was post college, I found myself gravitating towards some of the early startups that I got to see in the local Boston area and just, that were around, like, that I bumped into through, on campus or, then when I was looking at jobs. Actually, I was a Booz Allen management consultant for a few years. And so I had an opportunity to look at some of the things that were going on in the, like in the educational software industry. And so I was looking at some of the things that were happening there that were more startup-y. And I found that what kept happening was that I kept being like drawn to like the founders. Like I just wanted to hang out with them and they just seemed the coolest people in the whole world to me. That's all I could think about was how cool they were. So after business school, unlike pretty much 99.9% of my graduating business school class, I wanted to go to be in startups. Like at the time, that was not a thing that you did. And so I was telling you a little bit, I was in Tel Aviv and I started a company with some Israelis, brought it back to Boston. And then I've pretty much been here since then. Um, one of the things I would say, and the reason that I think maybe it was latent is my dad was an entrepreneur in the biotech world. And when I was growing up, he was building a company that went public and whatever. And I really didn't pay any attention to it at all, I thought. But it must have been in there somewhere, like in terms of my having seen him do that kind of thing. And I didn't, it was in a field I didn't understand in terms of the biotechnology and stuff, but the journey of it was something that he was really excited about. And, obviously I get it now. It's much better. So that was very cool. And then the other thing that was very cool that I think is interesting is my mom was, she worked for IBM in the 1960s as a programmer. She was one of those like women they hired who were good at math and was like a programmer with punch cards. So I always think I've got like engineering and entrepreneurship in my blood.
Wow. What have they thought, or as you've kind of built these companies and been so successful, like did they care? I guess, like your dad, like me thinking about myself, like if my kids went and started companies, I'd be so proud. I'd be so like, in that how it was, or they never really pushed you in that, like.
They never pushed, but tremendously, tremendously supportive. And I believe proud and excited, that they, got to see it. And, of course, when you're the family of the person who's the founder entrepreneur, you see the highs and the lows, right? And also you've experienced, in my dad's case, you've experienced them as well. So it's not like this like glamorous lifestyle at all. Like it's just insane, right? It's just so unbelievably intense and, highs are highs, lows are lows and stuff like that. So I think for them, they mostly were kind of like, okay, like it's really exciting that Ellen's doing this and she probably could use some support here, which they were really great about.
Um, did you have a mentor at any point in your career, th- especially as first time CEO? So it doesn't matter, but like, did you have a mentor at any point?
Several, and still do. And some of them I'm still in touch with, even here as I'm sort of in this next phase of, being on the, in the operating partner role. I did from very early on. And I, I the advice I give to newer entrepreneurs is you need those people. Those people are critical for you. And it isn't necessarily just one person, right? It's sometimes this person is really powerful and exciting and a great mentor and inspiring to you in this particular set of issues. And somebody else might be for you for something else. Or as you evolve in your journey, like you need different kinds of mentors and supporters. But like, so I was part of the original team at Netiza in the data warehousing space. And so Jit Saxena was the founder CEO. And he was, is, and still will be a mentor to me like forever, like we're like, it's like 20 years gone by. So he's maybe one of the early ones where, he challenged me and pushed me and, I was working for him as an employee. But when I was ready to go be a founder myself, he was like, I'm going to help you. And he did. He made sure that the venture people that he had relationships with, worked with me and took me on, to kind of, engage with me as an entrepreneur in residence and all that kind of stuff. He put money into the company, like stuff that really matters, and at that early moment. And then there have been other people along the way who have just been like, when you need the, like you're stuck on something and they're the people you call. You're like, I'm like, I'm almost done with this funding and we ran into a snag. What do I do? Right. Or I'm really having problems with this person on my team and I just cannot figure out what to do to make this be productive. Right. Can you just sit down and talk through it with me and stuff? and you know that they've lived the journey, right? You know that they're not going to give you bullshit advice. They're going to give you real advice.
Someone, one of the episodes, they talked about kind of like a personal board of advisors,
Yes.
and I thought that was a good way of describing this because it is hard to go at this alone. I mean, not impossible, but very difficult to go at it alone. I don't think I've met a single, I can't think of a single successful founder that I've met that said, I just did it by
Right.
myself,
And I'm using AI and it's just me and there's nothing else.
Exactly.
Sure.
But I think, yeah, that's really interesting. Yeah, and I think that those people, they something that I found when I was younger is that you worry like, oh, could I reach out to that person because I don't know, are they get in your case they he was your CEO, but like I and I always tell people like, you if you reach out to most people have been through the journey, most really want to pay it back. Like they really want to. So I always tell people just reach out. You'd be surprised. Uh, I would say it's like a 90% hit rate,
Totally agree.
right?
Totally agree. If somebody said, I'm building a company and I'm really interested in the fact that you had this experience or you did this thing or whatever, or you're a woman, founder, CEO, whatever, can I just have a short call with you? Right. Or if I'm local, can I buy you coffee or something like that? Why would I not say yes if I can do it? Right. If I'm able to do it, I would do it. It's like kind of, and even if it's like, oh, I'm running all over the world, I'm traveling and stuff like that, you can take a 10-minute call. Right. I mean, so I do feel that that's really important. And luckily for me, I've had people who were those people. And, in the end, like, you look back and you think like those people, not only did they get it, but they also like they did it in a way that wasn't like, "Oh, I'm just doing it to be nice." Like it wasn't about that. It was that like they were like they see that you're serious and that you really wanna do something exciting and you wanna build a company and stuff like that. And so they feel very motivated, to help you. And I feel that way for sure.
The you mentioned your two daughters. Do they see you building these businesses? Have they kind of been exposed the way you were to your fathers, maybe through osmosis, maybe more intentionally? Like, how have you handled that?
I think they've seen more because I used to like bring them into the office and they would come to company parties and like they knew the people and the team and the stories and stuff like that. And so, for better and for worse, because they definitely, they were there for the ride. Um, I don't know that it's necessarily made them think like, oh, I want to be an entrepreneur. Like I can't say that I know that that's true. It's possible, maybe at some future point. But I think they have an understanding of what that whole life is like in that experience in a way that, I hope it will be helpful to them in their profession in some way. But on the other hand, it also makes me feel close to them, right? Like that they really have been part of the conversation. And, they have really good ideas, those girls, so sometimes I'll say, hey, what do you think about this? Like they're adults, they're in their 20s and they have some good insight.
I like that. That's how I grew up with my father taking me to meetings, taking me to things and asking me even at the age of, 11, 12, like, what's my thought on this meeting that we just came out
Right.
of? What's like,
Right.
and I've tried to do the same with with my kids, which has been, really, really interesting because I took them at like 5, 6 to the office. And as soon as they could write, I was like, just write down what you're hearing, and at the end of the meeting, they would come to me, what does churn mean? Like what? And they would draw the graphs, like actually draw like the charts they saw on the slides.
That's great.
I think, but you don't even know
Right. You don't know what's sticking.
you don't know. You don't know what's actually happening.
Yeah.
You know, I think, a lot of people I've interviewed have had similar stories, but in not necessarily big companies, but entrepreneurial kind of parents. And I think there's also something about work ethic that you kind of
Right.
see, right? Because you understand what it actually takes to be successful. And I think if nothing else, even if they're not entrepreneurs, or I think there's some osmosis of like, wow, look at what my parent had to do.
Right. Yeah. And, as it happens, I have 2 daughters, right? So there's an aspect too of like, seriously, you can do it. Whatever it is, go do it, like so there's
Yeah.
that in the DNA as well, I hope. And and then also finding the balance of life that they want, right? Like there's no answer here, right? In terms of like you have to work this hard, you have to do this many things, whatever. It's just not true. So like where is the balance for them individually? And, hoping that that's like an open conversation that can be had.
Knowing everything you know today, all the experiences you've had in your career, if you could go back and give yourself one piece of advice at the very beginning of your career, maybe before you started at Booz Allen, like what would that one piece of advice be?
Be so intellectually curious. Just wanna know, like, about what's happening around you, wanna meet people, be open to experiences. I think it took me a while to come to that, like, I kind of somehow thought of myself on more of a track, coming out of school and coming
Mm,
out of, at Booz Allen, there were projects, with structures to them and stuff, and just, like, this that element of serendipity that is part of entrepreneurship, of like you had lunch with that person and then by chance you started talking about this topic and then suddenly you're building a company together, right? Like there are things like that happen. Or why does some particular person invest in your company or not? Like the things that you can do that are structured and that you have control over, and then a certain amount of just being open to connections, experiences, learning about new things. You just never know. And so I highly encourage that, and I also wish I had done it earlier.
the Ellen, thank you for doing this with me. I have enjoyed this. We could probably talk for like 4 hours, but
Totally.
I really appreciate you taking the time and just sharing all this. I think there's so much good stuff in here. We got tactical. We talked kind of high level. We talked future facing. So anyway, thank you very much.
My pleasure. And shout out to Barak Kaufman for introducing us.
Yes. Yeah. Barack, we didn't talk too much about the PEF group, but we met through PEF, which is Post Exit Founders, and it's a group that Barack Kaufman created and has, I don't know, thousands of people now exited founders. It's amazing. So thank you, Barack, for making the introduction. And yeah, I hope everyone enjoyed. If you did, please share with your networks. That's a wrap for this week's episode of Not Another CEO Podcast. Thanks for joining. For show notes and more, please visit notanotherceopodcast.com. We'll see you next week.